Thanks,
You
John.
weren't born yesterday. You knew how controversial this tweet would be. Let's put it back up again so people can see it. Why did you decide to send that out?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to grab people's attention, John, because as I reflected on this Saturday afternoon, this seemed to be a very important matter to my mind. I didn't choose that picture at random. I've been to that camp actually several times, John. I walked down that railroad siding where the families were separated, and that's why I used that picture. That's the scene where families were separated. Now, look, I know we're not Nazi Germany, all right? But there is a commonality there and a fear on my part that we have standards we have to live up to. You know, John, if you walk down that track, you go through the portal and you open up onto acres and acres where the barracks used to be, and you can still see the footings of the barracks, and beyond that, the crematoria. And then you look at the sky and it's blue, and the trees are green, and the dirt's brown. I mean, this really happened. And although that's in Poland now, it was in Germany during the war. I've lived in Germany for 3 years, a more civilized people you cannot find.
But General,
and so I was trying to point out we need be careful not to move in that direction.
the comparison, though, is one that critics latch onto, and they will note, among other things, that the Jews who walked through that door did not choose to walk through that door at Birkenau. The families going to the border, the parents are choosing to go there. The parents crossing the border have committed a crime, whether it be a misdemeanor or a felony. You can argue they've committed a crime. The people who walked through that gate at Auschwitz-Birkenau, they had committed no crime. Also, the people who walked through that gate, they were killed. The people crossing the border here, that is not what's happening. And then there's people who say you leave the Holocaust out of this. Just leave it out of it completely. Any discussion of comparing that to anything else is inapt. What do you say to them?
Yeah, so that's a picture from 1943, 1944, John. Let's run the clock back to 1933, which is really what I was trying to address, all right? And in 1933, what did we see in Germany? A cult of personality, a cult of nationalism, a cult of grievance, a press operation that looked like and was the Ministry of Propaganda, and then the punishing of marginalized groups. Now, John, I'm not saying our needle is anywhere near the red. I'm not claiming that at all. But I am claiming our needle is moving, and it's not moving in the right direction. And if I overachieve by comparing it to Birkenau, I apologize to anyone who may have felt offended. But John, I've repeated, you and I have shared this before. The veneer of civilization is quite thin. We need to be careful about our own society and not accept as normal things that are not normal.
You say you're not making a one-for-one comparison here, but do you believe the Trump administration is on that spectrum that you just laid out, the 1933 spectrum that you were just discussing?
Well, John, I was very careful with my words. I said that the needle is nowhere near the red, but the needle isn't moving in a positive direction with regard to grievance, nationalism, cult of personality, lies, and attacks on marginalized groups. Those things have changed in the past couple of years.
General, what I do appreciate about you coming on and talking about this is you own it. You don't deny you wrote that tweet. You don't deny what you were trying to do. You were trying to provoke a discussion. The administration now is not owning its choice. Have the debate on the merits. Have the debate about whether or not children should be separated by parents at the border. But there is no debate. This was an administration choice. The White House chose this. And then overnight, we have the Secretary of Homeland Security putting out this statement saying we do not have a policy of separating families at the border, period. So how do you interpret that intransigence from a cabinet secretary?
It was not thoroughly thought out in the administration. It was, like a lot of things, an instinctive response to campaign promises that were made. And so you're right, John. You've got a Secretary of Homeland Security saying it's not happening, a Attorney General saying it's the will of God, the President saying the Democrats made me do it, and Steve Miller saying I did it. What's a country to believe?
Is it a deterrent? Do you believe separating children from their parents when they cross the border is a deterrent? It will keep more people from coming.
Well, two thoughts come to mind, John, and maybe equally harsh to my tweet on Saturday. There are a lot of things that are deterrents that we shouldn't do. That's one. And traumatizing children is probably one of them. But number two, so far, statistically, it does not seem to have been a deterrent. So you've got both the philosophical and the practical question that are still not proven.
What can be done? What would be a deterrent? If the ultimate goal is to keep these parents from going to the border with their children, how do you do that?
Well, but John, let's not take the crisis and expand it beyond what it truly is. I mean, in terms of our southern border, we have more foreign nationals moving south across that border than we do moving north. We have been a net exporter over the past several years. And although you have these specific cases of these people doing these particular things, what's happening there right now is not a national crisis. I get it. We're a sovereign nation. We have a right to control our borders, but we should do it within our ideals.
When the White House says there is no policy to separate children from their parents, are they lying?
Well, I mean, I see children separated from their parents. Newsmen see children separated from their parents. And so what they're saying does not seem to comport with objective reality.
The Washington Post reported overnight that Roger Stone, who has been a longtime political advisor to Donald Trump, had a meeting in the spring of 2016 with a Russian promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. Ultimately, this Russian apparently wanted $2 million for this dirt. Roger Stone said no because he said Donald Trump doesn't pay for anything. That's why it went down. But by the Washington Post's accounting, that makes 11 either campaign officials or advisors, transition officials or advisors who had contact with Russians. Does that number seem usual, normal to you?
No, it's not normal. And in fact, John, what we already know via public knowledge, the meeting with Vetselnitskaya with regard to orphans, and then the correspondence between Don Jr. and WikiLeaks and so on, there was a lot of connective tissue between the campaign and organs of the Russian Federation. And look, every one of them may have turned out to have been incredibly naive and stupid mistakes on the part of the administration, rather part of the campaign, rather than anything criminal. But you know, John, as director of CIA, I know a little bit about being investigated. And when we had an incident like this at the agency, the first thing we did was to get our team together so that we had a good picture as to what went on. And it's clear to me that never happened with regard to the Trump campaign or administration. And frankly, John, chaos theory as a defense only takes you so far.
And the timing of that, just to be clear, that meeting happened within 2 weeks of the Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr., which happened a few weeks before the WikiLeaks release of the DNC hacked emails. Right. So that's just a sense of the timing there. I want to go back to administration, again, immigration, in your tweet, which was of Auschwitz-Birkenau, comparing what's happening at the southern border with what happened in Nazi Germany. You suggest that your concern is that there is this slippery slope of what the administration is doing here. Steve Bannon, who was one-time advisor to the Trump administration, senior advisor in the White House, he did not like your criticism of the administration. This is what he said over the weekend.
Well, I don't believe in the deep state, but we'll get into this later. I think Hayden and all that crowd, Brennan, all of them. This shows you the over-the-top, anti-Trump, anybody but Trump, to demonize the President of the United States as a former military officer, completely unsatisfactory. And it's over-the-top comparison. This is a law, okay? The President is enforcing a zero-tolerance policy. We've got to get security on the southern border. He has not been given his wall, and I believe he's going to enforce this policy.
Let's break that up into parts. First, as a former military officer, he says it's inappropriate for you to criticize the president as you are.
Actually, I didn't bring up the president in the tweet. I talked about governments. I specifically avoided the president. If he thinks the president's responsible for it, then I guess that's why he brought up the president. And so I have a right to speak. I also have a responsibility to respect the office and the occupant of the office, and I work very hard to do that every day. But John, the most telling part of that brief conversation was the tactics that were used to undercut my argument, which was frankly not to try to undercut my argument, but to discredit me and other folks as being illegitimate voices.
Well, the other thing is that Bannon is actually arguing from a third position. There's what you were saying, which is that the policy is wrong. There's what Bannon is saying, that the policy is right and that we are doing it. And then there's what the president is saying, which is that we're not doing it, or it's not my policy right now.
I understand. Back to the confusion. I mean, look, if they want to defend this, and maybe we should have a deep discussion, because what Mr. Bannon brought up there, is certainly a factor. I don't think it's compelling, but it's an important factor. I mean, a conversation that says this is what we are doing and why, with some unanimity from the administration, would be a good first step.